small music hall was buzzing with excitement. People had filled the seats, chatting quietly, some leaning over to catch glimpses of each other, and others adjusting their cameras or phones to record the evening. The air was heavy with anticipation because tonight was special. Famous musicians, legends of the piano world, were expected to perform. Everyone was waiting for the show, talking about who would play first, who would impress the most, and who would leave a mark on everyone's memory. Amid all this chatter, a young woman quietly slipped through the door, almost unnoticed. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the grand chandeliers, the polished wooden floors, and the rows of seats that were filled with people she had always admired from a distance. Her hair was tied back simply, and her clothes were neat but plain. She didn't care about standing out or being noticed. All she wanted was to play. She carried an old, slightly scuffed piano case in one hand. It didn't look like much, but it held her most treasured sheet music and her dreams. Every step she took seemed cautious, careful not to disturb anyone, but also steady, showing her determination. Even though she was young, there was something in her eyes that told a story of years spent practicing in quiet rooms, of early mornings and late nights, of music that had been her friend, her guide, and her comfort. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed some heads turning briefly, but the room was full of noise and movement, so no one really paid attention for long. She found her way to the piano at the center of the stage. It was a grand, black piano, polished to shine under the bright lights. She stood for a moment, looking at it, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The stage felt enormous, but it was familiar in a way. She had practiced alone in rooms much smaller than this, imagining the sound echoing through halls just like this one. Her heart beat faster, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. Music was not about showing off. It was about telling a story, feeling, and sharing it with others. Around her, the audience continued to talk and laugh softly, not realizing that something unusual was about to happen. She pulled out her sheet music and set it gently on the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys, just for a moment, as if greeting an old friend. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers rest lightly on the black and white keys. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She wasn't thinking about the famous musicians sitting in the front rows. She was thinking about the music she had written in the quiet of her room, the melodies that had grown with her over years of practice, and the emotions she wanted to share. She wanted the music to speak for itself. Her first note was soft, almost a whisper. It was gentle and careful, like a breeze brushing across a still pond. People in the audience looked up, some turning their heads slightly curious. The noise in the hall began to fade, even though she hadn't tried to stop it. Her fingers moved gracefully, yet with a kind of raw honesty that was rare. Every note carried a feeling, a small story of its own. The music was delicate, yet it held a quiet power that slowly made the audience listen without even realizing it. Some people began to lean forward in their seats, adjusting their positions to hear better. The famous musicians who had been chatting and joking moments before now looked surprised. They weren't used to music that didn't try to be loud or flashy but still demanded attention. There was a purity in what she was playing, a sincerity that drew people in. Even though the notes were simple at first, they were full of meaning. She was telling her story, and everyone who was listening could feel it. She continued to play, her hands moving smoothly across the keys. The music changed slightly, becoming a little more complex, but never losing the gentle, heartfelt tone. The audience was quiet now. People had stopped talking, leaning forward, and some had even closed their eyes to better feel the sound. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The connection was happening through the music itself. Each note seemed to float through the hall, touching hearts in ways words never could. As she played, she thought about all the times she had been overlooked, all the competitions she had entered and lost, and all the times people had told her that her style was too soft, too different, too quiet. But in this moment, it didn't matter. Here, in this grand hall, with all these legends sitting and watching, her music spoke louder than any words. Her nervousness melted away, replaced by a calm focus that made every movement feel natural. She was in her element, exactly where she was meant to be. A few audience members exchanged glances, whispering quietly to each other, realizing that something special was unfolding before their eyes. The music was not just notes and rhythms. It was a story of patience, dedication, and pure love for the craft. It was a reminder that talent doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and flashiness. Sometimes it quietly enters a room and slowly changes everything around it. She was doing just that. Her fingers continued to dance across the keys, each note carefully placed, each pause meaningful. The hall seemed to lean in with her, listening, absorbing, and reacting without a single word. She could feel the energy shifting. The famous musicians who had been talking moments ago were now completely still, their eyes fixed on her hands, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. They had seen countless performances, but something about her presence, her softness, and her honesty made them stop in their tracks. She paused for a moment, letting a single note linger in the air. The silence was not empty. It was filled with anticipation and wonder. She looked down at her hands and then at the sheet music, taking a breath and continuing with even more confidence. The music started to build, still gentle, still true to her style, but with a sense of growing emotion that could not be ignored. It was as if she was inviting everyone in the room to take a journey with her, to see the world through her eyes and her heart. As the first part of her performance came to a close, the audience remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing what they had just heard. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected a young, quiet pianist to hold their attention so completely. She lowered her hands from the keys, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She hadn't played for recognition or applause, but the effect she had on the room was undeniable. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not because of fame or awards, but because of the music that had always been a part of her. She stood up, took a small bow, and then stepped back slightly from the piano. The legends in the audience were looking at her with newfound respect. Some were nodding subtly, some smiling softly, and others were simply still, amazed at what they had witnessed. She didn't smile too broadly or bask in the attention. That wasn't her way. Her satisfaction came from knowing that her music had reached people in the way she had always hoped it would. Even as the audience whispered among themselves, commenting on the unexpected brilliance of the young pianist, she quietly packed her sheet music, her hands moving gently over the keys one last time. She knew that this was just the beginning of something bigger, that her journey as a musician was only starting to take shape in this new way. She had entered the hall quietly, almost invisible, but she had already made an impact that would not be forgotten. The hall was still alive with murmurs, but she was calm. She walked slowly off the stage, her heart still beating fast, but her mind clear and focused. She had faced her fears, shared her music, and let the notes speak for her. In that moment, she understood that true artistry was not about being loud or flashy, but about being authentic, sincere, and willing to let your heart guide your hands. And with that, she prepared herself for the next part of the evening, knowing that the story she had begun to tell was far from over. The young pianist returned to the piano after a short break, carrying a sense of calm confidence that hadn't been there before. The audience, still murmuring about her first performance, had begun to settle again, their curiosity rekindled. There was a quiet excitement in the room, like a calm before a storm, and everyone seemed to sense that something even more special was about to happen. She sat down carefully, adjusting the bench to the right height, taking a deep breath, and placing her hands on the keys. Her eyes closed for a brief moment, and the hall seemed to fall into an even deeper silence, as if the audience itself was holding its breath. Then she began to play again. This time, the music started soft just like before, but there was a new depth to it. Every note carried more feeling, more emotion. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story, and the audience could feel it. Her fingers moved with precision, yet each movement felt natural, like the music was flowing from her heart rather than her mind. The melodies were delicate at first, gentle waves of sound that brushed against the listener's emotions. People leaned forward instinctively, some closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Even the most seasoned musicians, who were used to incredible performances, were captivated. The young pianist wasn't trying to impress anyone with speed or complexity. She was reaching out in a way that made everyone stop and listen. As the music grew, it began to tell a story of hope and struggle, of dreams that had been chased in silence. She thought about the long hours she had spent practicing alone, the nights when no one had listened, and the days when she had doubted herself. Now she could channel all of that into her music. The audience could feel the weight of her experiences, the effort it had taken to get here, and the joy she found in expressing herself. There was a moment when the music shifted, and a slightly faster, more intricate section appeared. Her fingers danced across the keys with grace, creating a pattern of sound that seemed almost magical. Each chord built upon the last, creating a feeling of rising tension and anticipation. The audience could sense the story unfolding, and they were completely drawn in. Whispers stopped. Phones were lowered. Eyes were fixed on her hands, amazed at how effortlessly she made the piano sing. The young pianist didn't pause to look at the audience. She didn't need to. Her focus was entirely on the music and the feelings it could convey. She imagined every note painting a picture in the listeners' minds, each melody carrying a message that words could not. She played with both strength and subtlety, letting some notes linger in the air, while others rushed forward like a river breaking through its banks. A few people in the front row exchanged glances, their faces showing surprise and admiration. They were legends in the world of music, yet here they were, silent and attentive, moved by a performance that no one had anticipated. Some leaned forward, their hands unconsciously tapping along with the rhythm. Others simply sat still, letting the emotions of the music sink in. It was rare for someone to hold the attention of such an experienced audience so completely, but she had done it. The music continued to evolve. There were moments of quiet reflection, where her hands barely touched the keys, producing notes that seemed to float in the air. Then, suddenly, the melody would swell with emotion, rising and falling like waves on the shore. The audience felt every rise and fall, every pause and return, as if they were part of the story themselves. The young pianist was no longer just playing. She was connecting with everyone in the room on a deeply human level. Some of the older musicians, who had seen countless performances, whispered to each other in disbelief. They recognized that this was not just skill. It was something more. There was a soulfulness in her playing that couldn't be taught, a depth of emotion that came only from living through experiences and pouring them into the music. The young pianist's performance was no longer just a recital. It had become a shared experience between her and everyone present. Time seemed to stretch. The audience became completely absorbed, losing track of hours and minutes. Each note brought new emotions, memories, and reflections. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the sincerity and vulnerability of her music. Others felt a spark of inspiration, thinking about their own dreams and passions. The young pianist's quiet approach had created a powerful ripple effect, touching hearts in ways she could never have imagined. She played a sequence that was soft and tender, a gentle reminder of vulnerability and hope. Her hands moved carefully, yet with confidence, producing sound that was both fragile and strong at the same time. The audience could sense the honesty behind each note. It wasn't about showing off or proving herself. It was about sharing something real and meaningful. That authenticity resonated deeply, and even the most reserved listeners felt the impact. As the music reached a more emotional climax, her hands flew across the keys with precision, yet there was a natural beauty to it. Each chord seemed to carry a memory, each melody a story. The young pianist was fully immersed, her eyes sometimes closing, sometimes opening to glance at the audience, though she never let herself be distracted. She had found a rhythm that spoke directly to the hearts of those listening. There was a hush when she played the final notes of this part of her performance. They were soft, lingering, almost hesitant, like she didn't want the moment to end. The hall was silent, everyone holding their breath, appreciating the delicate finish. Slowly, a ripple of applause began, gentle at first, then growing stronger as people realized the depth and beauty of what they had just witnessed. The young pianist smiled softly, standing for a small bow, acknowledging the audience's admiration, but not letting it change her focus or humility. The legends in the front rows were now watching her with newfound respect. They had witnessed a performance that broke through expectations, a display of talent that combined technical skill with genuine emotion. They were impressed not only by her playing but by her ability to communicate so clearly without words. It was a reminder to them that true artistry wasn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it arrived quietly and transformed everything it touched. She took a brief moment to relax, wiping a bit of sweat from her forehead, but her mind was already thinking ahead. The performance was far from over. She knew that she had more stories to tell, more emotions to share, and more connections to make with the audience. The music was her language, and she was eager to continue speaking through it. She adjusted her posture, placed her fingers back on the keys, and prepared for the next part of her journey on the piano. As she started playing again, there was a sense of anticipation in the hall. People had learned to pay attention now, realizing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The young pianist's quiet presence had already left a lasting impression. She had shown that talent and passion could command attention without needing to be loud or flashy. Her music was heartfelt, honest, and full of life, and everyone could feel it. The performance continued, weaving through soft, gentle melodies and more complex passages. Each note carried meaning, each pause created suspense, and each chord resonated with the listener's emotions. The audience was completely absorbed, caught in the beauty and sincerity of the music. The young pianist's quiet determination and authenticity were now undeniable. She had transformed a simple recital into a memorable experience that would stay with everyone in the hall for a long time. The evening was just beginning, but the impact of this part of the performance was already clear. She had captured the attention of the audience, including the most experienced and legendary musicians. They had seen her skill, yes, but more importantly, they had felt her heart and soul through the music. It was a quiet power, one that demanded respect and admiration, and it left everyone eager for what would come next. The music shifted. What had started as soft, delicate notes now grew in depth and complexity. The young pianist's hands moved confidently across the keys, bringing out melodies that were intricate yet full of feeling. Every note seemed to carry a story, every chord a memory. She could feel the rhythm of the room, the way the audience leaned in to listen, the subtle intake of breath as the music swelled. It was as though she had created a bridge between her heart and theirs, a silent conversation that only music could carry. The atmosphere in the hall changed. The audience was no longer just observing. They were part of the music. Some closed their eyes, letting the melodies paint pictures in their minds. Others leaned forward, mesmerized by the precision and emotion of her playing. The young pianist didn't rush. She let each note breathe, letting it linger just long enough to touch the listener's heart before moving to the next. The quiet legends in the front rows, who had seen countless performances, were now fully absorbed. They whispered softly to one another, a mix of admiration and disbelief in their voices. They had not expected this, and yet it felt like something inevitable, something right. As she continued, the music began to tell a story of struggle and resilience. There were notes that trembled, hesitant and fragile, reflecting moments of doubt and fear. Then, a surge of strength emerged in the melody, bold and confident, as if she was overcoming every challenge she had faced. The audience felt the journey with her, their emotions rising and falling in rhythm with the music. Tears glimmered in some eyes, not just from the beauty of the sound, but from the raw truth in the performance. Her fingers moved with remarkable agility, switching between soft, flowing passages and quick, intricate sequences that seemed almost impossible. Yet there was a natural grace to every movement, a fluidity that made even the hardest sections seem effortless. She was in control, yet she let the music guide her, letting it flow from her heart rather than forcing it with technique alone. The audience could sense this balance, the perfect combination of skill and soul. A subtle change occurred in the hall. The legends, who had initially been curious and slightly skeptical, now leaned forward, completely captivated. Their conversations had ceased entirely. The young pianist had drawn them in, not with showmanship, but with honesty and vulnerability. The power of her performance lay in its authenticity. She didn't need to prove herself. She simply played, and that was enough to command attention. Every glance, every breath, every small movement was noticed. The music spoke louder than words ever could. The melodies became more layered, each hand telling a different part of the story, intertwining seamlessly. There were moments of tension, where the chords clashed in ways that made the listener hold their breath, and moments of release, where harmony returned, soothing the heart. The young pianist played with emotional precision, conveying complex feelings without losing the softness that defined her style. The audience was caught in this ebb and flow, feeling the highs and lows as if they were part of the journey. She thought about all the years of practice, the countless hours spent alone, the moments when no one listened, when she played only for herself. Now, every note she played carried the weight of that experience, and the audience felt it. They understood, even if they didn't know her story. Music has a way of transcending words, and she had mastered that invisible language. She was not performing for fame or recognition. She was performing because it was the only way she could express what words could not. The hall was completely silent except for the music. The audience had stopped whispering, the cameras were still, and even the rustle of programs had ceased. The young pianist's presence had transformed the room. She had become the center of attention, not because she demanded it, but because the music demanded it. Every note was alive, carrying emotion and intention. The legends in the audience could feel the honesty behind each sound, the years of dedication, the quiet courage that had brought her here. A slow, haunting section followed, soft and deliberate, almost as if the piano itself was breathing. The young pianist's hands glided effortlessly, creating a sense of space and emptiness that was filled only by the music. Listeners were drawn in, sensing the vulnerability in every note. It was a quiet moment, yet it held immense power. The hall was so still that one could hear a pin drop, yet the energy was palpable. Everyone was waiting, hanging on, not knowing what would come next but trusting that it would be extraordinary. Then came a sudden flourish, a burst of speed and intensity that surprised even the most experienced musicians in the room. Her hands moved like lightning, yet each note landed with clarity and intention. The audience gasped, their emotions riding the waves of the music. It was exhilarating and moving, a demonstration of not just skill, but the heart behind it. She was telling a story of triumph, showing that quiet determination and perseverance could create something extraordinary. The young pianist paused briefly, letting a single note linger in the air. The silence was profound, filled with anticipation. Then she continued, transitioning into a melody that was both joyful and reflective. The music seemed to dance, playful yet graceful, inviting the audience to feel the lightness of spirit and the joy of creation. Even the legends, who had long been accustomed to technical brilliance, could not hide their amazement at how she combined emotion and skill in such a seamless way. As she neared the end of this part of her performance, the music began to slow, each note more deliberate than the last. There was a sense of resolution, a feeling that the story she had told was coming to a gentle conclusion. The audience sat in rapt attention, absorbing every nuance, every subtle change in tone and tempo. The young pianist had taken them on a journey, and now they were quietly reflecting on what they had experienced. It was more than a performance. It was an emotional voyage. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the silence lingered for a heartbeat, as if the hall itself was reluctant to break it. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, gentle at first, then growing steadily into a wave of admiration. The young pianist stood and gave a modest bow, her smile soft and sincere. She was not seeking accolades, but she accepted the recognition humbly, knowing that the music had reached the hearts of those listening. The legends in the audience looked at her with newfound respect, some nodding slowly, others whispering to each other with amazement. They had witnessed a performance that combined technical skill, emotional depth, and authenticity in a way that few could. They understood that she had achieved something remarkable, not by demanding attention, but by letting the music speak for itself. It was a quiet power, a gentle command that left a lasting impression. The young pianist walked off the stage briefly, taking a moment to breathe and gather her thoughts. She knew that the performance was far from over, that there were still stories to tell and emotions to convey. Yet, she felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that she had already touched the hearts of those who had listened. She had shown that true artistry does not rely on noise or spectacle, but on sincerity, dedication, and the courage to share one's inner world. As she prepared to return to the piano, she could sense the energy in the hall. The audience was ready, eager to continue the journey she was leading them on. The young pianist felt a quiet excitement. She had captured their attention, yes, but more importantly, she had created a connection, a shared experience that transcended words. The music was alive, and in that moment, it felt as if the entire hall was breathing with her. Caught in the spell of a story told without a single word, she began to play again, each note carefully chosen, each chord infused with emotion. The legends in the audience watched in complete silence, fully aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. It was not just the skill, but the heart and authenticity that shone through every sound. The young pianist had reached a level of expression that few achieve in a lifetime, and the room felt charged with the quiet intensity of shared experience. As the final notes of this part faded, there was a profound sense of awe. The audience sat, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of deep appreciation. They had been part of something rare and beautiful, a moment that would stay with them long after the performance ended. The young pianist's journey was still ongoing, but she had already left an indelible mark. Through her quiet determination and heartfelt music, she had reminded everyone in that hall that true artistry speaks not to the ears alone, but to the heart. The young pianist paused for a moment, letting her fingers hover above the keys. The audience, still captivated from her previous performance, leaned forward in anticipation. She didn't rush. She wanted the next part of her music to arrive naturally, to unfold in a way that would tell her story completely. Her eyes scanned the hall for just a moment, noticing the expressions of awe and quiet admiration on the faces of the audience. Even the legends, the ones who had performed on the grandest stages, were leaning forward, completely absorbed in her music. She felt a wave of calm wash over her, a quiet reassurance that she was doing exactly what she needed to do. Her hands finally touched the keys again, starting softly. This time, the music carried a new emotion, a feeling of realization and recognition. It was a melody that spoke of journeys completed, of struggles faced and overcome, and of the power of perseverance. Every note was precise, yet it carried warmth and vulnerability. She played with a sincerity that could not be learned, a depth that only life experience could provide. The audience felt it immediately, their breaths slowing, their hearts opening to the music. The young pianist gradually increased the tempo, adding layers of complexity without losing the gentle tone that had captivated everyone from the beginning. Her hands moved effortlessly, shifting between high and low notes, creating a rich texture of sound that filled the hall completely. The audience was spellbound. They were no longer thinking about the famous musicians in the room, the prestige of the hall, or the event itself. They were only thinking about the music, about the story being told through the piano, and about the young woman who had captured all of their attention so quietly. A few of the legends in the front rows exchanged glances, their eyes wide with surprise. They had been through countless performances, yet this one felt different. It wasn't just about talent. It was about connection. The young pianist was communicating something profound, something personal and universal at the same time. Each chord resonated with truth, each melody evoked memories, and each pause left space for reflection. The power of her performance was in its honesty, in the fact that she was sharing herself completely without pretense. As the music swelled, it carried a sense of triumph. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, yet every note was deliberate, never careless. She was telling the audience that the journey mattered more than the destination, that every quiet practice session, every moment of doubt and persistence, had led her to this stage. The legends were no longer just watching. They were listening deeply, letting the music speak to them. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled softly, and all of them felt the weight of her story. She slowed down briefly, letting a soft, lingering note float through the hall. The silence that followed was thick with emotion. The audience could feel the pause, understanding its significance. It was a moment of reflection, a chance to internalize the journey she was sharing. The young pianist's eyes closed for a moment, and she let herself feel the music as fully as she had hoped the audience would. Her heart beat in rhythm with the melody, each note a reflection of her own experiences and growth. Then she introduced a gentle, playful section, a melody that danced lightly across the keys. It was as if she was sharing a personal joy, a moment of triumph over challenges, a glimpse of the happiness she found in music itself. The audience responded subtly, some nodding, some smiling, some tapping their fingers lightly, almost unconsciously, to the rhythm. She noticed the small gestures and allowed them to guide her, but she never lost her own voice. The music was a conversation, a shared moment of understanding between her and everyone in the hall. The young pianist's hands moved with elegance and precision, creating layers of sound that were both complex and emotionally resonant. She balanced fast, intricate sequences with slow, expressive chords, letting the music breathe and expand. The audience could sense the journey she had been on, the long hours of practice, the quiet determination, and the unwavering love for her craft. The legends in the room were now fully engaged, recognizing not just skill but the heart and soul that had shaped it. A sense of climax began to build in the music. Her fingers flew across the keys with purpose, every note contributing to a crescendo of emotion and intensity. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of her performance. The young pianist was not performing for attention or praise. She was performing because she had something to express, and the audience could feel it in every chord. The energy in the room was electric, yet there was still a profound sense of intimacy. Each listener felt personally touched by the music. As the crescendo reached its peak, she transitioned smoothly into a slower, more contemplative section. The music became reflective, almost introspective, as if she was inviting the audience to look inward alongside her. Her hands moved gently, producing soft harmonies that resonated deeply. The audience sat in quiet awe, absorbing the emotion and understanding the journey she had conveyed through her music. Even the legends, with decades of experience, were visibly moved, acknowledging silently the depth of her artistry. The young pianist continued to play, blending technical mastery with heartfelt expression. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The audience was fully immersed, no longer spectators but participants in the story. They could feel the struggles, the hopes, and the quiet victories embedded in the melodies. The legends, usually reserved in their reactions, were nodding in respect, clearly recognizing that this young pianist had achieved something extraordinary. She had transformed a simple performance into a profound emotional experience. Slowly, she brought the music to a gentle conclusion. The final notes were soft and deliberate, lingering in the air as if reluctant to end. The hall remained silent for a moment, everyone holding their breath, letting the impact of the performance settle. Then, a wave of applause began, growing steadily as the audience expressed their admiration. The young pianist stood, giving a modest bow, her smile sincere and humble. She had not sought attention, yet she had captured hearts in a way that would be remembered by all who had listened. The legends approached her after the applause, their faces showing awe and respect. They spoke quietly among themselves, exchanging words of admiration and recognition for the depth of her performance. She received their praise with humility, grateful for the acknowledgement but not changed by it. Her joy came from the music itself and the connection she had created, not from the accolades. The recognition was a bonus, a reflection of the impact her authenticity had on others. The young pianist realized that this moment marked a turning point. She had entered the hall quietly, almost unnoticed, yet she had captured the attention and hearts of those who had the power to influence the music world. Her performance had shown that true talent does not require loudness or spectacle. It requires sincerity, dedication, and courage. She had demonstrated that even a soft, gentle presence can create profound impact, and that the language of music can speak to anyone, regardless of status or experience. As the audience settled after the applause, she prepared herself for the final part of her performance. She felt a sense of calm and focus, knowing that she had already made a lasting impression. Yet, she also felt excitement, eager to continue sharing her story through the piano. She adjusted her posture, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The journey was not over. There were still emotions to convey, stories to tell, and hearts to reach. The hall was quiet once more, filled with anticipation and respect. The young pianist began to play again, each note carrying the weight of her experiences and the joy of her craft. The legends in the audience watched silently, fully aware that they were witnessing a performance that would leave a lasting mark. She continued, weaving complex melodies with delicate harmonies, balancing technical brilliance with emotional depth. The music was alive, and the audience could feel every heartbeat, every emotion, every story. As she played, she knew that she had achieved something remarkable. Not because she had sought fame or recognition, but because she had stayed true to herself and her music. The audience had responded not to showmanship, but to authenticity. She had shared her heart, and in doing so, she had touched the hearts of everyone in the hall. The young pianist's quiet approach had proven more powerful than anyone could have imagined, and the legends themselves had been moved, reminded of the true essence of music and artistry. The young pianist sat quietly at the piano for the final part of her performance. The hall was completely still, every person leaning forward, waiting for her next note. The energy in the room was different now. It was not just admiration or curiosity, but a shared sense of awe. People were ready to be taken on one last journey with her music. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel the moment fully, and then placed her hands on the keys. The music started softly, like the beginning of a gentle breeze. Each note was deliberate, flowing with a sense of purpose and calm. She wanted this part to feel like a reflection, a culmination of everything she had expressed so far. The audience responded instinctively, drawn into the melodies, listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. Even the legends, who had experienced countless performances, sat captivated, completely silent, letting her music envelop them. Her hands moved smoothly across the keys, creating harmonies that were both intricate and comforting. The melody built slowly, carrying an emotional weight that was unmistakable. It was a story of perseverance, of quiet courage, of someone who had pursued her passion despite obstacles and doubts. Every note was a testament to her dedication, a message that hard work and authenticity could create moments that touched the soul. The young pianist transitioned into a slightly faster section, her fingers flying with elegance and precision. The music became lively, playful, yet still filled with emotion. She wanted the audience to feel the joy that music could bring, the happiness that comes from expressing oneself freely. The hall seemed to resonate with every sound, the notes bouncing off the walls, wrapping around the listeners, making them part of the experience. People shifted in their seats, some tapping lightly to the rhythm, others closing their eyes, letting the music take them to another place. As the music continued, she introduced moments of intensity. Fast, complex sequences ran through her fingers, but she maintained control and grace. Each note had a purpose, contributing to the story she was telling. The audience was completely absorbed, experiencing a mix of emotions: excitement, tension, and awe. The young pianist had become a storyteller, her instrument a voice, and the listeners were living the narrative with her. Even the legends were whispering to each other in admiration, realizing they were witnessing something rare and profound. She paused briefly, letting a soft chord linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. The audience felt the weight of the pause, understanding its significance. It was a moment to reflect, to absorb everything she had shared. The young pianist's eyes remained closed as she prepared to continue, feeling the connection she had built with every person in the room. She played not for fame or recognition, but to communicate, to share the essence of her heart through the music. Then she shifted to a gentle, flowing melody, one that felt like a conversation. The notes spoke of understanding, of empathy, of the universal language of emotion. People leaned closer, drawn into the delicate nuances. Each chord felt personal, as if it was written for the listener themselves. The young pianist moved naturally, her hands guiding the music with intention, her expressions reflecting the emotions she conveyed. There was a softness, a vulnerability, and at the same time, a quiet strength in every sound she produced. The music gradually grew more dynamic. Layers of sound built upon each other, creating a feeling of richness and depth. The audience could sense the story unfolding, experiencing the journey of the pianist, from uncertainty to confidence, from quiet determination to heartfelt expression. The legends were visibly moved, acknowledging with subtle nods and expressions the beauty and authenticity of her performance. It was a reminder to them, as it was to everyone in the room, that true artistry comes from honesty and dedication. As the performance reached its emotional peak, she allowed the music to swell with intensity. Her fingers moved rapidly yet gracefully, each note precise, each chord resonant. The hall vibrated with sound, yet there was a balance that kept it from becoming overwhelming. The young pianist had achieved something remarkable. She had combined technical mastery with emotional depth in a way that felt effortless and natural. The audience was captivated, hearts racing, minds absorbed, emotions stirred. Then came a gentle slowdown. The music softened, returning to a tender, introspective melody. Each note was deliberate, carrying reflection and calm. The audience felt a sense of closure, a peaceful understanding that the journey was coming to an end. Tears glimmered in some eyes, smiles appeared on others, and all were touched by the honesty and beauty of the moment. The young pianist's hands moved lightly, almost reverently, as if she were gently laying down each note, ensuring that the story she had shared left a lasting impression. She let the final notes linger, soft and sustained, fading slowly into silence. The hall remained still for a heartbeat, the impact of her performance settling over everyone like a gentle wave. Then, gradually, applause began. It started softly, hesitant at first, then grew into a roar of admiration and appreciation. The young pianist stood and gave a modest bow, smiling warmly, her eyes reflecting gratitude and humility. She had not played for applause, but she accepted it with sincerity, recognizing the deep connection she had made. The legends approached her after the applause, speaking quietly, their faces full of respect and amazement. They expressed their admiration for her skill, her dedication, and most of all, the authenticity she had brought to her performance. She received their praise with humility, acknowledging their words but remaining grounded. The true reward was not the recognition, but the knowledge that she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room, that her music had spoken in ways words could not. The young pianist felt a quiet satisfaction. She had begun the evening unnoticed, almost invisible, yet she had made a profound impact. Her music had commanded attention, not through force or spectacle, but through sincerity, skill, and emotional truth. She had proven that quiet determination and heartfelt expression could create moments that are remembered long after the final note fades. Her journey had been validated, not by fame, but by the connection she had forged with those who had listened. As she gathered her sheet music and stepped away from the piano, she reflected on the evening. She had shared a part of herself with the world, and the response had been more than she could have imagined. The applause, the respect, the admiration were all tangible signs that her music had reached people on a deep level. Yet, even more than that, she knew she had stayed true to herself, her passion, and her story. That authenticity had been the key to everything. The audience continued to talk quietly among themselves, still processing the emotions of the performance. The legends exchanged impressed glances, acknowledging the rare talent they had witnessed. Many would remember this night for years, the night when a young pianist approached the piano softly and captivated even the most experienced musicians. It was a reminder that true artistry does not need to shout to be heard, and that sincerity and dedication have a power that cannot be denied. The young pianist left the stage with a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had completed her story, shared her journey, and created a connection that would remain long after the hall emptied. Her path had been one of quiet persistence, of hours spent honing her craft, and of unwavering love for music. Tonight had shown that all of that effort, all of that passion, could resonate in ways that are profound and lasting. In the days and years that followed, the story of that evening spread. People spoke of the young pianist who had played quietly yet powerfully, who had stopped legends in their tracks with nothing more than her music and her heart. Opportunities came her way, collaborations, performances, and recognition, but she remained grounded, focused on what mattered most: the music itself and the ability to share it sincerely. She continued to play with humility and dedication, always remembering that the true power of her talent lay not in applause or fame, but in the connection and emotions she could inspire. The evening had ended, but the impact of her performance endured. For the young pianist, it was not the accolades or recognition that mattered most, but the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself, touched hearts, and left a lasting impression through her art. Her quiet approach had proven stronger than any fanfare, and her music had become a legacy, reminding everyone who had listened that true beauty often arrives softly, yet resonates forever.